evening and welcome to the Equipment Church of Christ. Good to have you guys. I know it's been a crazy weather day, so we hope that you're at home, that you're safe, and everything is good wherever you may be at. We're looking at wrapping up the lesson on all. This is lesson 5 in our study of Colossians, and also hit Philemon at the end. And so all of Jesus is all. And one of the things that Paul is dealing with as he was refuting, and something that was starting to take hold of the churches, and we find Paul dealing with it, we find Peter dealing with it, we'll see John deal with it in his Gospels, is the idea of Gnosticism. And so it really Gnosticism gets into full bloom when we get into the 2nd century. We read a lot more about it, but its early roots start in the 1st century, in the mid-century, around the 1860s, and this is 30 years into the establishment of the church, and it starts to move in after these congregations and young Christian congregations have been established. A lot of them like Paul in the Gentile world, in the idea of Gnosticism, these Gnostics come in and start to infiltrate churches. And so we see in Paul's writing him refuting the doctrine and the teaching of the Gnostics. So we find it here in the Colossian church, refuting that. We find it in Galatians in chapter 1. He's surprised that they were so soon removed away from the faith that had been given unto them. Here Colossians, stay with the faith, don't move away from that which you was taught. Pastors taught you, the faithful minister taught you. We've been praying for you ever since we've learned your love of the brother in your faith. Don't lose it, don't stray away from it. It's Paul encouraging to churches. So look at the idea of Gnosticism and how it starts to take hold, and these are some of the things that Paul's refuting. And so just a summary, we talked about this last week, I did this slide, just to kind of summarize the tenets of Gnosticism, and then kind of how Paul refutes it. We'll talk a little bit more in depth as we look at Colossians chapter 1, and we look at verses 15 through 20. But I might bring down this chapter 1 just a little bit, just to remain on board there. Yes. Okay, that sounds good. Okay. All right, so we see the tenets of Gnosticism. One of the first tenets of Gnosticism was salvation was knowledge. Salvation was knowledge. Of course, Paul's going to refute this in verse 14 of chapter 1, where we have been saved by the blood of Jesus Christ. And Colossians chapter 1, verse 14, in whom we have redemption through his blood, even the forgiveness of sins. So salvation is through the blood of Jesus Christ, and by the blood of Christ. Peter said we've been purchased by the blood of Christ, not by the blood of silver, but by the precious blood of Jesus Christ. So our salvation has been by the blood of Jesus Christ, not knowledge. Gnosticism, or comes from the Greek word gnosis, which is knowledge. Gnosis, which is knowledge. And so for the Greek, for those Gnostic, salvation was knowledge. Another tenet of Gnosticism was a perfect God created the world through a series of emanations or mediators. There were several mediators. The ones that were closer to God were more spiritual. As they get further away, they were evil. And so Paul refutes this in Colossians chapter 1, verse 16. He says, God created the world by Jesus Christ. In verse 16, for by him were all things created that are in heaven and that are in the earth, visible and invisible, whether they be thrones or dominions or principalities or powers, all things were created by him and created for him. So that refutes that God created everything, the world, and Jesus Christ was a part of that creation. The third tenet of Gnosticism was one of the first emanations that Jesus was not, the Son of God. He was just one of the many emanations or mediators created by God. But Paul refutes that again in Colossians chapter 1, verse 19. Paul says, for him should all fullness dwell. Jesus was not just an emanation, according to the Holy Witness, he was not a created being. Jesus is God. In him dwelt all the fullness of the Godhead dwelt in him bodily. So it pleased the Father in him should all fullness dwell. So he has all the fullness of God in him, in his human body. The fourth tenet of Gnosticism, that Jesus was not fully human, that he was not fully human, but in Colossians chapter 1, verses 20 and also 22, Paul says, "And having made peace through the blood of his cross, by him to reconcile all things unto himself, by him I say, whether it be things in the earth or things in heaven." In the body of his flesh, and then you that was sometimes dead and enemy in your mind by wicked work, yet now have to reconcile in the body of his flesh through death to present you holy, unblameable, and unprovable in his sight. He couldn't, if he was not fully human, he couldn't have died. But he did suffer a human death. He was crucified. He did suffer a physical death. He was physically buried, but he rose from the dead. So Jesus was fully human, and we'll look at some other things that signify the fact that Jesus was fully human. But Paul says that Jesus reconciled the world back to God through his body, through shedding of his blood, through his physical body, through death, to reconcile us back to God. Fifth tenet of Gnosticism says that since God created the world through these emanations of these mediators, the created world is totally evil, totally depraved. There's people that approach that. They say the world was totally depraved. They say that man was totally depraved. That man was a depraved being. And we know, we go back to Genesis, what's the one word that God used after his creation of everything? Good. So it was not evil. It was good. What made things evil? What made things evil? Sin. The sin came on the sin, but what God made, the earth was not evil, and man was not evil. But as some will say, that the earth is totally evil, everything is totally evil, man is totally depraved and evil, but no, man was made good. What's the song? God made man upright, but he saw other inventions. Yes, Proverbs 7:20. So he made us upright. He made us good. He made us holy. He made us pure. But we saw other inventions, and that's what led us astray and led us into sin. But what God created was good. But they say Gnostics, since God created the world and the nations that he created, the world he created was evil. But Paul says, going back to Colossians 1:16, God through Jesus created all things. All things were made by him and for him, whether visible and invisible, whether it be thrones, dominions, principalities, and powers. All things were created by him and for him. Yes, yes, yes. So man was made upright, but through his time in life, he sinned and saw other inventions. So, but God did not make us holy. He didn't make anything that was totally depraved. He didn't make an evil world. He made a good world, and he said it was good. But sin came in the world, and that's our downfall. So that kind of sums up those tenets of Gnosticism, and we see from the justification that Paul refutes those things here in the first chapter, and we can see how he refutes those ideas of Gnosticism. Now we look at chapter 1 and look at verses 15 through 20. Instead, it's Colossians chapter 1, 15 through 20 is, some of the most impactful teaching in these 5 verses here. And we pull it apart and look at it a little more in depth. We divide it up in 3 ways. We're going to first look at Christ, the person of Christ, the person of Christ, the person of Christ. As we look at Gnosticism, look at these 3. We look at the person of Christ. we see that Jesus, according to Paul, is the image of the invisible God. In verse 15, Jesus is the image of the invisible God. Jesus declared that anyone who has seen him has seen the Father. In John 14:9, Simon said, show us the Father and it will suffice us. Show us the Father. Jesus kept saying, I'm going back to the Father, I'm going to my Father. And they said, well, show us the Father. What did Jesus say to that? What did Jesus say when they asked him to show him the Father, show them the Father? He said, you seen him. Jesus said, if you seen what? If you seen me, you seen who? You seen the Father. So that means Jesus is the direct image. He said, have I been with you so long? You don't realize you've seen me, you've seen the Father. He came from the Father. He is the fullness of the Father. He is the invisible image. He's the image of the invisible God. And so, if you've seen me, you have seen the Father. When Jesus' forgiveness of the adulteress in John chapter 8, 1 through 11 confirms that God is forgiving. Jesus is compassion for the hungry and the sick. And Matthew 14, 13 through 21 attests to God's compassion for humanity. So he is the fullness of the invisible God. He has all the attributes of God. He's able to forgive. He was able to heal people and deal with people in their infirmity, but he was also able to forgive. And so he gave them a choice. Which one is it easier for me to do? Is it easier for me to say, rise, take up your bed and walk? Or is it easier for me to say, thy sins be forgiven? But to prove to you that I can forgive sins on earth, your sins be forgiven. And so Jesus proves that he was able to forgive sins, and Jesus had compassion for the hungry and for the sick. Attest to God's compassion for humanity. God cared about humanity. He cared about the hungry. He cared about the sick, and we saw Jesus came and did heal the sick and provided food for the hungry. Shows God's compassion. So this is the person of Jesus Christ. He's the image of the invisible God. He's the image of God. We also see that Jesus is both fully God and fully human. Go over to Colossians 2 and 9. Colossians 2 and 9. Jesus is 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 fully human and fully God. Colossians 2 and 9. Somebody had that read. Okay, all right. So in him dwelleth all the fullness of the Godhead bodily, not some of it. He didn't come down here with some of it. He came down here with all the fullness of the Godhead, but what? In human form bodily. And so that's very significant that he was human form, still had all and we know the scripture says what? In all points, as we are, he was tested as we are as humans. So being in God form, does that mean that Jesus somehow escaped all the frailties of being human? No, he didn't escape them. He experienced them all. He was hungry. He was thirsty. He was tired. He rested in the ship. Well, when he's with the disciples or after a long day, he rested. He was hungry. After in fact, after he came back, after he was resurrected, what did he do with his disciples? He ate. So he was still human. He ate. So we see him hungry, we see him tired, we see him happy and celebratory, we see him sad, we see him tears. So he was fully human. Just because he was God, he did not escape anything. Scripture said that at all points, like us, what he was tested and he was tempted, he was tried, he was tempted by the devil out in the wilderness after his baptism. So he went through the human experience. He did not shortcut it. He did not escape it by being God. He did not escape anything of being in the human experience. But yet, he still had the power and retains the power of God. We find Satan in the wilderness. What does he want Jesus to do with the power? So he knew. Jesus knows. The Satan knows he's still God. What does he want him to do?
and to do what? Wants him to use his power to turn these bread into stone. Use his power uh, selfishly for himself. If you want him to yield, I know you're hungry. You've been out here in the wilderness, so now use your power to do something selfishly and turn these bread into stone and feed yourself. So he wanted God. So God still had the power when he's with Pilate. Or was your kingdom, your kingdom of this world? My kingdom's not of this world. If my kingdom above this world, what could I have done? My kingdom was of this world, what could I have done? Could have brought down a legion angels and had, soldiers. He wasn't trying to fight a physical battle. He could have brought some backup. He could have called some backup from heaven to fight and to defend him. But he says, "My kingdom was not of this world." Uh, the Jews, the apostles and others, zealots, they wanted to know was Jesus going to come and wage a physical battle? They were just ready to rise up. And all he had to do was say the word "go," and they was ready to rise up and start a physical uprising, looking at Jesus coming down, being the king, and sitting on David's throne. They were certainly ready and poised to fight that kind of fight. He said, "Nope, not that kind of fight." Brother Disney.
37, he said, "In this kingdom of this world, people my servants fight, and I should not be delivered unto the Jews." So they certainly would have prevented that had he decided that's what he wanted. The kingdoms of the world, they would have been able to prevent it. Yeah, yeah.
At different junctures during Jesus' lifetime, he has an opportunity to what? Certainly could use his power. Certainly could use his power to keep him from being captured in the garden, being taken. He could have used his power, stop that when he was on the cross. He could have, but the mission that he was sent here, the goal that he was sent here, to glorify the Father, to complete the mission, and so he does not yield and use those powers to any way to stop and unfold the mission that had to take place. But he still has them, and he's still human in the human body. So he doesn't shortcut the human experience. So we see Jesus, he's both God. Also, it points to Jesus' humanity, as we saw in verse 22, in the body of his flesh through death to present you holy and unblameable and unprovable in his sight. So he died. He died. The body of his flesh. He died. He bled. Before, what happened to him before they marched him up to Golgotha? What happened to him? What happened to the Lord? So that a beaten and bloody body, does that prove he was human? He was scourged, he was bloody, whipped. Even before going to the cross, they tortured him pretty good. Took a crown of thorns, put it in his head, and then gonna the indignity of putting the cross beam of the cross and have him to try to carry that up to Golgotha, having been beaten and having been dehydrated, um, hadn't eaten all night. When did he eat last? Messiah ate the Passover. So that was in the early evening, and then they went out to the garden and Simeon prayed. He gets arrested in the middle of the night, early morning, goes in. So yes, his physical body was on the line and used to redeem us. So that points to his humanity too. God, as God, Jesus healed the sick, cleansed lepers, forgave sins, calmed the raging seas when he was out with the disciples and said, "Peace be still." He raised the dead, raised Lazarus in John chapter 11. It healed Darius's child. When Jesus healed diseased people, he demonstrated his power over sickness, as we see in Mark 40 and 40, Mark 1, 40 and 42. When Jesus forgave sinners, he laid to the claim to be equal with God to prove. Let's go over there to Mark 2 and 5. To prove that what? Because for him to say he forgives sins, the Jews said that was what? Blasphemous. He said what? He's putting himself in the place of God. To Mark 2 and 5.
The paralytic child, your sins are forgiven you.
Okay, so he said that.
I'll forgive you. Why didn't he tell him to take up his bed and walk? He saw when Jesus saw their faith, he said unto them, said unto the sick, thy sins be forgiven thee. And but then there were certain of the scribes sitting there and reasoning in their hearts, why doth this man thus speak blasphemy? Who can forgive sins but God only? So he's proven a point. He is God as well. And immediately when Jesus perceived in his spirit that they reasoned so within themselves, he said unto them, why reason ye these things in your hearts? Whether is it easier to say to the sick of the palsy, thy sins be forgiven thee, or to say, arise and take up thy bed and walk? But that ye may know that the Son of Man hath the power on earth to forgive sins, he says to the sick of the palsy, what? God sins be forgiven. So Jesus knows the sin. Jesus could have said, take up your bed and walk, but Jesus knows what? He knows that those scribes are sitting there and listening, and so it's a message to them that he's the Son of Man. Yes, brother, Greg.
Power, which indicates that his word is true. And so Jesus would later say to the Jews, if you don't believe me, at least believe me for the work's sake.
Yeah.
And so they should have bore out the fact that, man can open the eyes of the blind, he can make the son of palsy walk and all these kind of things. A person who can do that has to be a God. And even the man in John 9, who Jesus opened his eyes, he said, who ever heard of such a thing? As he reasoned with the Jews, who ever heard of such a thing? So whether you say he's a sinner or not, I can't believe that God would hear that from a sinner.
Yes.
So he reasoned correctly, and so the works should have spoken for him. Because the idea of even doing miracles, it was to set forth that this person was sent from God. When they had the works to back up or the miracles to back up, then the word was verified by the miracles.
Yeah, and as we learned with John, the man born blind in John 9,
What did the disciples, what did they think was the cause of his blindness? Sin. They asked Jesus, did this man sin or did his parents or somebody else sin? So they already in their thinking thought that sickness was a manifestation of what? Sin. So Jesus said, thy sins be forgiven thee. For them, the same thing as take up your bed and walk, because some of them thought that sickness led to sin. But Jesus makes a point here, and that's why Mark, as far as Mark's description of Jesus, Mark says he's the what? He's the Son of Man. And so in here, Mark says, whether it is easier to say that sins be forgiven, or take up thy bed and walk, arise and walk, but that ye may know that the Son of Man hath power on earth to forgive sins, he saith unto the sick of palsy. And I say unto thee, rise, take up thy bed, and go thy way in thy house. So he said, okay, first he said, thy sins be forgiven, but it was easier. Okay, take up thy bed and walk. I can do it both ways. I can say, thy sins be forgiven you. I can say it, take up thy bed and walk. The effect is still the same. This man with palsy is able now, is able to take up his bed and move under his own power. But he's proving a point. And so the young man immediately rose, took up his bed, and went forth before them all, insomuch that they were amazed and glorified God, saying, we never saw it, what? On this fashion. We ain't never seen it on this fashion. As Brother Disney said, yeah, they should have accepted it for his works, but their hatred, their envy would blind them and not allow them to see the work that the Messiah was doing. So Jesus heals that man, and Jesus forgave sinners. He laid claim to being equal with God, as we saw in Mark 2 and 5. In the person of Christ, Jesus confirmed his mastery over nature by calming the raging sea. He has mastery over the natural world, was able to speak and say, peace be still. Jesus officially confirmed his deity when he rose from the dead, and he predicted he would do this. He said that if you destroy this temple in 3 days, it'll be raised. What temple he's talking about? What tabernacle he's talking about? He's talking about his physical body. Was he talking about the tabernacle that was there in Jerusalem? No, he's talking about the spirit. Destroy this tabernacle, and in 3 days it'll raise up. And we see that oftentimes the human body is also referred to as a tabernacle. John says the Word was Jesus was the Word and was manifest, and it tabernacled or tended among us. So Jesus said, "Destroy me, and I'll be raised up in 3 days." And so he confirmed that as a human being, Jesus became weary, hungry. Jesus wept, he suffered, bled, and died. And so that proves his humanity. We see John 4 and 6 concerning his weariness. John 4 and 6. John 4 and 6. Yes.
So you already have made up your mind that you are against an individual. And just think about like in John 2, where he says, destroy this temple. And they thought, this thing's been 50 years in the building, and you're going to build up in 3 days. John chapter 6, where everything he said about his body and the blood and stuff, they took it literally. Yeah. John 8, they argued with Jesus on every point throughout that as he tried to explain things to him. And he would often say, how is it that you do not understand, even to his disciples? But it's just amazing how far you will go. When you don't want to understand and you are against something or against someone, you will go against all logic and reason with no understanding to just absolutely continue in unbelief, which is exactly what the Jews did.
Yeah, they'll go to the extreme and go way the other way, not to see what Jesus was trying to teach.
Mm-hmm.
You actually closed your eyes and made your hearts dull.
Close your eyes, put your
He said you stuffed up your ears so you couldn't hear it. You know how when we were kids and we played the game, somebody was saying something, we close our ears, and I don't do what we do when we close our ears. We did something else too. Closed our ears and went la 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 la. We would sing just so that we could drown out your voice by our own voice by closing our ears, and we would make noise so that we could definitely not hear what you was trying to say. Look at John chapter 4 and 6.
His journey sat thus on the well, and it was about the 6th hour.
All right, so Jesus
Journeying, and of course the woman at the well is going to come and offer him some water. So Jesus was weary. Regarding his anger, Mark 3 and 5. Mark 3 and 5. Regarding Jesus' anger.
Anger, being grieved for the hardness of their hearts, he said unto the man, stretch forth thy hand. And he stretched it out, and his hand was restored whole as the other.
All right, and then
The Pharisees went forth and straightway took counsel with the Herodians against him, how they might destroy him. So yes, Jesus had anger. Let's go back and pick it up. As he's entering the synagogue, beginning at verse 1, chapter 3, and he entered again into the synagogue, and there was a man there which had a withered hand, and they watched him whether he would heal him on the Sabbath day, that they might accuse him. So what's the problem with him healing on the Sabbath day? Not supposed to do any work, but they missed something. All right, and he says unto the man which had the withered hand, stand forth. And he said unto them, is it lawful to do good on the Sabbath day, or to do evil to save life, or to kill? But they held their peace. Why couldn't they say nothing, Brother Greg? Dishonest. Right? So this is Jesus is doing a test case, so he gets angry. Is it lawful to do good on Sabbath? Before another incident where Jesus was talking to them and said, which one of you If your donkey falls into a hole on the Sabbath day, are you just going, you're not supposed to work. The law says don't work. But if your donkey falls in a hole, are you going to let him stay there? Or are you going to go get some rope and dig him out? So Jesus is saying, you know how to distinguish work, like intentionally going out and doing work. That's intentional. But this is an emergency. This is a different situation. Your animal falls off into a ditch. We're not going to let the animal sit there. Well, sorry, buddy. We ain't supposed to do nothing on the Sabbath. So was man made for the law or the Sabbath made for man? Made for man. And so we have discretion. Yeah, we're supposed to rest, but we have the common sense is if your animal falls into the hole, you're going to go out and get some ropes and try to rescue and pull him out. That's not work you intended to do, but that's a necessary situation. And so now Jesus, is it lawful to do good on the Sabbath day? And then he goes, ridiculous to save a life. Would you save a life on the Sabbath? Can you do good to save a life? Or or to kill? Now that's the hyperbole there, but they didn't say nothing. Hell be peace. And when they looked roundabout on them, and so Jesus looked roundabout on them. So why did Jesus get angry? They didn't have nothing to say.
Yeah,
And before they would do that, they'd rather just say nothing.
and so as we look,
And he entered into the synagogue, and there was a man there with a withered hand. And they watched him whether he would heal him on the Sabbath. Jesus already know they're watching him. So then Jesus like, all right, I'm gonna play along. You watch me. Let's see. If you gonna do it, you ain't supposed to do nothing on the Sabbath day. It's the Sabbath. So they sitting there with judgmental eyes and their arms folded, and they're watching. So Jesus, okay, I'm gonna fall right in. Is it lawful to do this? But there was a maxim in the prophets that said what? A prophet could heal on the Sabbath. The prophets could heal on the Sabbath. They were allowed to heal on the Sabbath. Didn't Jesus come like the prophets? They said one greater than Elijah, one greater than Moses was gonna come. It's gonna be Jesus. So he came, he did all the stuff that the prophet said. He, like Isaiah said, he's gonna come and heal. He's gonna heal. He's gonna heal the sick. He's gonna give sight to the blind. Then what Isaiah said? Didn't that Isaiah prophesy about him? So now he was doing that. Why they have a problem with Jesus doing it on the Sabbath day? Prophets were allowed to heal on the Sabbath day, but is there problems with Jesus? And so yes, Jesus got angry when he looked at them and saw their hard-heartedness and their deception, their dishonesty, that you would forbid somebody to do good on the Sabbath. The Sabbath wasn't meant to just to box you into where you couldn't go save your animal on the Sabbath, that you couldn't go save a life on the Sabbath. We see the Good Samaritan, who was so busy getting to church that they didn't have time to help the man. Priests and the Levites, they were so busy. So they were so heavenly concerned, there were no earthly good. Here's a real situation for you to show the goodness of God to this stranger that's been befallen by thieves and is hurt. But no, they passed by on the other side like they didn't see it.
Yeah. And you have a little fender bender or something like that. You see you need help, but you can't be late. You got to get here. You can't be late. Stop and help him. You got to get to church on time. Leaving your AAA coming.
that's it.
Dennis, you all right? We called AAA on you, man. We'll send somebody back for you, brother. We'll send somebody back. Yes, sir.
Sabbath days. Then when he said a Sabbath day, that could be many days. There could be Sabbaths, correct? Because if you look at if you go back to Exodus, when he said, remember the Sabbath day, without
Yeah.
an S, that means particularly Saturday only. But when you say Sabbath days, is that meaning every day could have been a Sabbath day?
No. He said,
It's lawful to do good on the Sabbath days, plural. Yeah, so remember the Sabbath. When does the Sabbath happen? Once every week, just like Sunday happens once a week. So Jesus saying the Sabbath, talking about the Sabbath days as a whole, as a group of days. Is it lawful? Any Sabbath day, is it lawful to do this? So that's what Jesus is saying by saying the Sabbath days. Anytime the Sabbath occurs, Is it lawful to go save a life? Is it lawful to kill somebody? You know, is it lawful to do any good on the Sabbath day? So that's what Jesus is testing them. Are they so rigid in their legalism that it would not allow Jesus to heal this man and to do good on the Sabbath day? And like we say, the Sabbath was made for man, was made from the rest, but wouldn't prohibit you from doing good and being helpful. But as we see by time Jesus comes on the scene, what they had elevated the Sabbath to so legalistically that you couldn't do anything on the Sabbath day. Well, they would do what they want to do, but you couldn't do anything as far as doing good. So Jesus, we see the anger, and of course later on we see his righteous indignation when he would clear the temple and clear the money changers out of the temple. Jesus had righteous anger because of how they had taken and misused the temple. So we see his anger. We see him shedding tears over the death of Lazarus. All this is proving the person of Christ. He was a person. He was human. Jesus cried over the impending destruction of Jerusalem, which would happen in AD 70. Roman General Titus, which they would destroy. And so Jesus saw that impending doom over Jerusalem and had tears. Concerning his suffering and his agony, it was like great drops of blood when he prayed to his Father in the garden. So such an intense time of agony and prayer, knowing what he has to do on the spiritual side, but the human side, the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak, knowing what he had to do. That's tremendously agonizing in that as he prayed and he sweated profusely in the garden. So we see that agony. John said of his brutal, inhumane death. You can read in John chapter 19. Let's look at John 19, 1 and 3. John 19. Of course, John give us a good description because he has a ringside seat. He was at the trial. He went in. Peter stayed out by the fire. He was there at the cross where the rest with Joanna, Mary Magdalene, where the other disciples all ran away and hid. John 19, 1 and 3. Then Pilate therefore took Jesus and scourged him, and the soldiers platted a crown of thorns and put it on his head, and they put him on a purple robe, and they said, Hail, King of the Jews, and they smote him with their hands. So Pilate therefore said again, Behold, bring him forth, that so that doing this is during his trial. So yes, he will see some agony as they, because really all Pilate wanted to do was just whip him and scourge him and release him. But they said, nope, we will not have that. We will not let you release him. You release somebody else. All right, so we see his agony and we see his brutal humane death. And then as we go on later in John 33, 34, I think that we talked about the soldiers piercing him in the side. Yeah, 33. But when they came to Jesus and saw that he was dead already, they brake not his legs to fulfill the prophecy that not a bone on his body would be broken, but they did pierce him in the side, and out ran blood and water. So again, he's human. He bled blood. He pierced him in the side. He was crucified. He was treated inhumanely. He was a person. This is the place. So that was all those things prove the person of Christ. All those things. He had all the anger, shedding tears, his weariness, mastery over sickness, over death. All those things prove he's God, and also prove he's human by the things that he suffered. Now we look at the place of Christ in creation. So these are the three things that Paul talks about in Colossians chapter 15 through 20. He talks about the place of Christ. And so now he talks about Christ in creation. Jesus holds the first place in creation because he was the firstborn over all creation. Colossians 1:15. Look at Colossians 1:15. Colossians 1:15. Somebody have that?
Invisible God, the firstborn of every creature.
Okay, he's an invisible
The image of God, the firstborn of every creature. So that is, Jesus has that designation as being the firstborn of every creature. Now, this does not mean that Jesus was the first person that God created. It does not mean that. It has nothing to do with time. It has everything to do with the special honor. Look at Psalms 89 and 27. 89 and 27. Just like honor, just like what we'll say, the president and his wife is the first lady. That is she's not the first person to ever be the president's wife while he's in office. Every president who has a wife, their wife gets the title of being the first lady. And so that's a honorary title. So Jesus is the honorary title, the first person of creation. Psalms 80, 89, 27. Okay, all right. So a prophetic psalm here. I will also make him my firstborn higher than the kings of the earth. So God being Jesus being the firstborn as far as having this honorary position, he would make him higher than all the kings of the earth. Jesus is the creator of all things, as we see in Colossians chapter 1, verse 16. All things were made by him and made for him. He has a role in creation. When we read in Genesis, we see the let us, who's talking in the let us. There's three people there. There's God the Father, Jesus, the Word, and the Spirit. Let us, the Godhead, let us do this. Let us make man in our image. Let us. There's a plurality there. And so all things were made by him. All things were made for him. Jesus is there in the beginning. John says that in John 1:1. In the beginning was the Word. The Word was made flesh, and the Word. Let me go back and give it to you. In the beginning was the Word. The Word was with God, and the Word was God. The same was in the beginning with God. John says this. All things were made by him, and without him was not anything made that was made. So Paul is confirming what John said. God was in the beginning. In the beginning was the Word. The Word was with God, and the Word was God. Or in the Greek, it says God was the Word, and the same was in the beginning with God. All things were made by him, and without him was not anything made that was made. In him was life, and life. So in the creation, he has a part. Nothing was made separate and apart without Jesus being there. All things were made by him, all things, and Paul says all things were made created by him and for him. John says all things were made by him and without him. So that means nothing done in creation was done without Jesus being there. So he is a part of creation, not like the Jehovah's Witness saying that Jesus himself is a created being, that he's a separate apart created being, did not have. They talk about Jehovah, they want the Father, Greg, but they don't want Jesus. He's a created being. Oh yeah, he's okay. He's just a created being. No, John. So what do they do, Greg? Do they cut John 1 out the butt? Is John 1 in their Bible? Okay.
The word.
Yeah, instead of the word.
So what they do with verse 3, all things were made by him. There was nothing made. They cut that one out?
Well, the problem is, where when it says he's the firstborn of all creatures, so they believe he was the first created, rather than he is the first begetter.
Yeah.
All creation owes its existence to him, which proves it in the next few verses. So rather than understand it that way, they believe he was the first created being, and then he created all other beings.
Yeah.
So he was a
Yeah, no, this is that is honorary. He's the first person of creation. That is a honorary position and title. He's the first one of creation, and we just read Psalm 89:27 that he will make him higher than all the kings of the earth. So that is a special position and title that Jesus will have as being the first one of creation. And Jesus is the creator of all things. Jesus not only created the world, but he also sustained it. Look at Colossians 1 and 17. Colossians 1:17. Okay. So all things all things were made for him, all things were made by him, all things were made for him, and as he says in verse 17, all things consist. All things are sustained by him. So that means Jesus is a central figure in creation, and he's also still a central figure in the world and how the world run. All things were made by him, for him, and all things are sustained by him. Uh, and he is before all things, and by him all things consist or sustained by him. So, yes, Brother Greg.
Get Gnosticism, because they believe that God could not have created sinful
Man.
flesh and these kind of things, so he had to create lesser beings.
Yeah.
And then those lesser beings being created, all of these physical.
A perfect God created us.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because if a perfect God, if they say that man is totally depraved and sinful,
And so the world, a perfect God couldn't have done that. But a perfect God did create a perfect man who was without sin, who was blameless, but later did sin. And then David was saying Psalm 8, what is man that he was crowned with glory and given dominion and power? So he was crowned with glory. He was made good. He was made, he had that glory from the Father beginning. And then now we see in Hebrews that now Jesus Christ now is what? Crowned with glory and dominion and honor. And then he made him higher and to be supreme. Well, Jesus Christ uh, is the central person in creation. Things made by him, for him, everything it consists. He sustains everything. Everything consists of him. So that's his place in creation. So we see his place, the person of Christ. We see his place Paul talks about his place in creation. And last of all, his place in the church. Jesus holds the first place in the church, as we see Colossians 1:18. He is the head of the body, the church, who is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, and that all things he might have the preeminence. So he's the head. Paul would say to the Ephesians that you talk about that, and what is the exceeding greatness of his power when he raised him from the dead and made him to sit at his own right hand in heavenly places, far above principalities, powers, dominion, might in every name that is named in this world and that which is to come. So Jesus is the and then continue on, put all things under his feet and gave him to be over all things unto the church, the fullness of the all in all. So Jesus is the first person in the church. He has the preeminence. He put all things under his feet. A governmental term. When everything's under your feet, that means everything's under your control. You have dominion. You have control over everything. So he put everything under him, gave him control. The NIV uses supremacy. The King James uses preeminence, and they mean first place. Jesus has first place in the church. The first place in the church of Christ does not belong to, doesn't belong to preachers. It does not belong to the the ministers' wives, or anybody else. The first place in the church doesn't belong to women, doesn't belong to children. It belongs to Jesus only and only Jesus. The first place. Now you can go down the street and people's wives is called the first lady in the church. Jesus is first person. We all brothers and sisters. None of us have a preeminence, but we take these secular titles and roll them right into the church. Okay, in the government, you call the president, call his wife the first lady. That's of this government. That's earth. But when we get into Jesus' kingdom and things that deal with spiritual Jesus' kingdom, Jesus is the first place. He's the first. He's the only one. Ain't no other body first, first this, first that. Jesus is the first place and maintains that place. So he is the first place in the church. So all of this, what Paul brings out in these 5 chapters here in Colossians chapter 1, verses 15 through 20. He talks about the person of Christ. He talks about his place in creation. He has a significant place in creation, and he has a significant place in the church. All that teaching in 5 verses that Paul's putting down to deal with Gnosticism. As we close tonight, we see Greg was talking about all this week, Sunday. We look at all, and it appears 7 times in Colossians in these verses 15 through 20. We see Jesus in all of creation, his significance in all of creation, and all that was created. Jesus in charge of all things that were in heaven, all things on earth, all things that are under the earth. He has all the fullness of the Father. In him, all the fullness dwells, all the deity. Jesus is almighty. Jesus is all knowing. Jesus is all powerful. He's all sufficient. When Jesus is all you have, he's definitely all you need. And there's an error to put anyone else ahead of Jesus. And so, but next week we're going to talk about the lesson is Jesus is all you need. This book is the sufficiency, the sufficient Savior. And so next week our lesson is Jesus is all you need. Will be in 2 Colossians verses 6 through 23 if you want to read ahead. Jesus is all you need. You don't need to put anything. Jesus plus something. You don't need to put anything. Jesus plus nothing is all you need to be sufficient. And that's the point that Paul's making here in Colossians. He's all in chapter 1, verses 15 through 20. He's all. He's all in all. He's all fullness, all creation, everything, all the fullness of the Father dwells in him. He's all. 7 times that word is used all in that text. So next week we'll talk about Jesus, all you need, as Paul continues